I was actually out for lunch for someone the other day that was involved in creating Trailhead, and they've actually left the ecosystem now. And I was like, you did too much of a good job because too many people have kind of got in Salesforce now, and unfortunately, with kind of general tech layoffs, there's not enough jobs to go around.
This is Salesforce Ben Insider, the podcast that brings you all the top Salesforce news, insights, and trends, completely unfiltered. Join me, Ben McCarthy, and some great special guests as we dive into the Salesforce discussions you won't hear anywhere else.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Salesforce Ben Insider, where we speak about Salesforce trends and things happening in the ecosystem and have conversations that you won't hear anywhere else. And today we've got a really interesting guest, the first guest from the mothership, Salesforce, and we're going to be talking about the Salesforce ecosystem maturing, changes, technical debt, and how to address the future. So Matt Bradley Roberts, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no worries at all. So Matt, you are a technical architect at Salesforce. So give us a bit of insight into what you actually do at Salesforce.
Sure. So I work in the professional services team. So my job is a lot like any other kind of consulting role. I go to companies that have asked Salesforce to step in or to help out. And then I advise them on how best to use Salesforce. So focusing on best practice, avoiding things like technical debt, and how to design their systems in a way that's scalable.
Yeah, very cool. And Salesforce has really bulked up their professional services division, haven't they? Because it's always been a thing since I've been in the ecosystem. But I know Traction on Demand was acquired right in the US, and
Yeah, absolutely. And I think post-COVID or during COVID, they saw a massive uptick in demand for professional services, and they went on a big hiring streak, and that's when I joined. So I was fortunate enough to join during that. But yeah, I think in the UK at the moment we have, or UK and Ireland, I should say, we have around 400 architects.
Wow.
Roughly.
Just
in our
architects, so
yeah.
Obviously consultants on top of that.
Yeah, so and support sort of program managers and things like that as well. So it's a big team. Yeah.
Wow, very cool. So a lot of people listening to this, watching this on YouTube, will have Salesforce technical architects as their kind of dream role, because it is kind of, I guess you have CTA maybe above that, but that's very elusive and, very, very hard to reach. But give us a bit of insight into your career in Salesforce. How did you reach a technical architect role?
Sure. So my background is coding. So I went to university, did a software engineering degree, and was one of the few people who kind of used their degree post-university. Worked for an internet service provider doing Java development. And then basically about 12 years ago, a recruiter reached out to me and said, there's a role coming up for a really small company in Sheffield up north where I live. And it's using a technology called Salesforce. Have you heard of it? And I said, nope, never heard of it. What is it? Sounds good. The salary was really nice. So I thought, okay, I'll look into it. Joined that company, and they were an ISV. So they were developing apps on top of the platform. I never encountered Sales Cloud or Service Cloud or anything else product-wise, but I loved the platform, and I thought, okay, it's a bit annoying. There are governor limits and restrictions in place that make it hard to just code on. But actually, over time, I realized it was making me a better technical developer because it was forcing me to write good, efficient, scalable code so that it could play within the boundaries, really, of that kind of cloud system. And then I became their technical manager, and over time realized I enjoyed working with our clients a lot. So I then got a job at Capgemini here in the UK and was their head of Salesforce engineering, so kind of head of their technical geek squad, going out and consulting. And that was something I really enjoyed, was working with companies, solving their problems in a technical way and kind of using Salesforce to solve their business problems. And then during COVID, I heard that Salesforce were hiring, and I was like, yes, this is my time. And yeah, by that point, I'd kind of got a load of certs, and I'd got a lot of experience in Salesforce and kind of working within the boundaries of. And then, applied, thankfully got the job, and the rest is history.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's kind of similar to me. I graduated from uni in 2012 in information systems. So it's half computer science, half business, perfect for Salesforce. But I was telling all my like friends and family, I got a graduate job as an IT consultant. I had no idea what I'd be consulting on, but turns out on the first day it was Salesforce.
Amazing.
And we were chatting before the podcast about how like it's pretty cool that we've gone from, you know, this software that, I mean, it was still big, you know, 10, 12 years ago, but not as big as it is now. But we, you know, this software that we barely ever heard of to this software now, you know, sponsoring F1, and it's like seemingly creeping into, you know, to the kind of mass market. So it's cool to see where it's got to.
Yeah, it's now a brand that my parents have heard. So
Okay,
that to me was when I realised it was quite cool that I worked for a company my parents had actually heard of.
Yeah, no, very cool. So we're going to be talking about a few topics today: technical debt, you know, the future in terms of how to position yourself, and a few kind of interesting things like how you interviewed Parker Harris, which is going to be super interesting to talk about. But give us kind of your perspective on how you've seen Salesforce as a platform and also the ecosystem change, you know, since you, when did you start your career?
So it was 11 and a bit years ago.
11 years,
so,
yeah. 2011, 2012.
Exactly, yeah. And back then in the UK especially, it was really niche, and the ecosystem in this country was a few people, and I kind of probably knew most of them by name. It was a bit bizarre. Outside of London, certainly, there was very few of us. And Trailhead didn't exist, and there was no real kind of help out there. I learnt Salesforce from paper. There was a thing called the cookbook, a paper document, and that's how I learnt Salesforce. And yeah, so it's grown now into this incredible platform where people can learn it in their spare time on Trailhead, and I think that is so underrated because not many companies out there do as good a job of that. And I know gamification's a bit blasé nowadays, but actually it's proven to work, and there are so many people out there learning Salesforce. And I think because of that ease of entry into the technology, more and more people are wanting to learn about it. It helped that the salaries of the jobs was pretty high for a long time as well, so it was really attractive for that. But the company and the product offerings, obviously through a lot of acquisitions and mergers and things, has grown into this sprawling metropolis of products that you can use to solve nearly all business problems that are out there. And because you can customize it on top of that, then you could theoretically create anything you wanted. And our App Exchange shows that. There are hundreds, thousands of partners out there producing apps for all kinds of business needs. So yeah, I think it's just become this incredible story of cloud technology solving business problems, and yeah, it's great to be part of, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was actually out for lunch for someone the other day that was involved in creating Trailhead, and they've actually left the ecosystem now. And I was like, you did too much of a good job, because too many people have kind of got in Salesforce now, and you know, unfortunately, you know, with kind of general tech layoffs, you know, there's not enough jobs to go around. But yeah, agreed. I mean, it was a fantastic initiative that I think other companies are trying to replicate now, because it was. It was such a good platform. But I mean, kind of segueing onto the topic of technical debt then, because Salesforce has expanded so much in its product set, but also, you know, there has been this like digital transformation boom over the past like 10, 12 years, right? I mean, Salesforce in 2014 was a $4 billion revenue company. And 10 years later, they're like nearly 10x, 35 billion. And so people have kind of scrambled to adopt cloud technology. Obviously, COVID was a huge kind of catalyst for that. But obviously, that also has kind of caused people using Salesforce some issues, because they've had to adopt this technology so quickly, get partners in to implement it. Salesforce, the platform, has changed so much as well. You know, we've gone from Classic to Lightning, which went from Aura to Lightning Web Components, and then Workflow Rules, Process Builder, Flow. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that. So firstly, for anyone that doesn't know, could you just describe what technical debt is, maybe in the context of Salesforce as well?
Yeah, no problem. Technical debt is, and it's been around, the term has been around for a very long time, but it's the kind of perceived future cost of making a decision now that may not be the optimum decision. So, for example, I might be considering setting up a new Sales Cloud instance, and I might want a process that allows my sales reps to use their phones whilst they're out on the field and all these other things. And actually, I kind of cut corners with my decisions. I think about just the now rather than the future. I don't think about how this could scale and grow my business from 5 reps, which can easily run off a bit of hacky code that I've thrown together, to, okay, my business might one day be as big as Salesforce and need 70,000 reps, and how on earth am I going to cope with that? So it's making decisions now that seem quicker and cheaper, but actually in the long term, it produces more and more cost in both time and money to go back and fix those decisions that you made early on. So it's kind of a perceived future cost. It doesn't always actually incur that cost, which is an important point that we'll talk about later. But so it's making a decision now that may then cost you in the future.
So could you give us like a relatable example then, maybe to do with code or something else that, what is kind of a lazy, lazy solution that is going to result in issues later on?
So a really simple example, and it is using code, and it's a big no-no, so people probably aren't doing it anyway. But for example, if you know that your business is only dealing with 30 accounts now, you might want to just iterate through those accounts and do something to each of those accounts when you're doing some level of automation.
Yeah.
And therefore, within the loop of looping through your 30 accounts, you might want to do an update or an operation of some sort. And therefore, within your loop, you stick an update. And that's fine when you've got 30 accounts. We all know Salesforce governor limits stop you as soon as you hit 101 DML statements. So I'm getting a bit technical. But basically, you don't want to be doing database operations whilst you're in a loop.
Yeah.
It's a really simple example, but it's one that will come to bite you if you are in a very small scale application and you don't consider that you might someday grow over 100 accounts. Because if you do, you're going to hit that limit, and then you need to go back and refactor it, work with lists and sets and maps, and then take it out of that. And it's a relatively simple fix, but you still have to take the time and the money to go and do that.
And it's quite interesting because you are getting quite technical, but this was something that would have been reserved just for developers. But now with Flow, obviously admins are having to, and declarative functional consultants are having to learn about this also, because Flow is the same, right? If you do an update inside the Flow and it's the same limits, right, as Apex.
In the background, it's actually writing a trigger, which is code, and it is doing those update records, that little box you drag into your for loop, is going to be doing a DML statement in the background. So absolutely, you'll hit the exact same limits.
Yeah. So in our Salesforce developer survey that we've released and we talked about in the first podcast episode, technical debt was kind of a common occurrence. So, we asked quite a lot of questions about what are your issues and kind of, there were some things to do that people felt it was to do with Salesforce, like platform limitations and challenges, but most other stuff was like, implementation stuff, like technical debt and gathering the right requirements and things like that. So clearly it's an issue. And I think when we spoke, you said when you work with clients, it also comes up. So what is a reason for so much technical debt piling up in orgs over the years?
There are multiple reasons. I think partly it's how quickly everything's changing. And actually what could be best practice one day might not be best practice later on. And one obvious example is Process Builder. When it first came out, everyone was diving on it and saying, this is great. Non-coders can now do some automation that involves some logic. And it was fantastic. And it still is to a certain example. It served its purpose. But Flow came along. Suddenly, Process Builder is being retired. And actually, immediately, companies could be in some level of technical debt just because they followed best practice back in the day of doing Process Builder. Now they need to move to Flow. Obviously, we can transform the Process Builders into Flow, and that's great, and that's easy enough to do. But it means that, there is some level of technical debt because of how quickly the platform is moving on. And that is inherent within cloud, and especially in Salesforce, is we want to be the bleeding edge. We always want to be the innovative company. We're the AI company. We're doing things that no one else is doing. And that means the platform's moving quickly. So there's going to be some level introduced there. There's also the reality that an accidental admin exists, and people fall into Salesforce roles that maybe don't have the computing background and the knowledge about processes and scalability and all these other things that can lead to technical debt. And they do things sometimes out of blissful ignorance. They think it's perfectly okay to do something, and that's not their fault. And then it turns out later down the line that's technical debt because they haven't thought about all these other things. So there is some kind of accidental technical debt as well.
And it's quite interesting because you said once upon a time I was one of those kind of accidental admins, So I was definitely implementing things that weren't best practice, just the nature of being a bit junior. But I think over the past 10 years, so much has changed, but also so many people have got into the ecosystem, which means, and again, I'm not blaming anyone that's junior, but if you join at the time just before Process Builder or just after Process Builder, and then you've got to learn something else, it's confusing. You've just learned one thing and, trying to learn best practice for all these things. So it's kind of an unfortunate result of just the platform kind of growing so much and people also adopting this technology so much because so much money was spent on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we are victims of our own success in some regards. We've grown, as you stated earlier, 4 billion to 30-something billion now, and we are now adopted by more and more companies, and that's great, certainly from my perspective.
Yep.
And we're all Salesforce professionals, so it's fantastic. But it does mean that more and more people are now doing Salesforce jobs that may not have the background or the knowledge to necessarily do a perfect job. No one does a perfect job, but the make better decisions, and that's not their fault. It's just there's so many things out there now and companies using it that trying to make the best decision on every project or every org you work on is going to be very, very difficult. Even for technical architects, very senior people, you're going to make mistakes, and even if you don't, some things that are best practice now, as I say, could evolve and become not best practice later. So
yeah, no, definitely. So I mean, we kind of touched on a few things there. If you're implementing bad code that doesn't scale, it's going to fail in the future and things like that. But what are some other long-term impacts of technical debt that you're seeing in some of the customers that you're working with?
So I'm currently working with a large-scale drinks company, and they have had Salesforce for, I think, 14 or even 15 years now. They have cleanup projects running sort of every 3 years where they deliberately address technical debt and say, we're going to look back at what we've done, work out what we can do to make it more scalable. So, for example, they had so many triggers on their account object. And by triggers, I mean flows, I mean process builders, workflows, actual coding triggers, that loading an account page or doing an update to an account record would take so long that the reps were getting frustrated that it was genuinely slowing down their business. And when a rep is making less sales in a day because the system is not scaling properly, that's technical debt coming to life. That is genuinely costing the business because decisions were made, rightly or wrongly, that means it's now really difficult for them to load their accounts. Now, that's been addressed and they've scaled it back and followed a bit more best practice about when to write triggers, when to use flow, when to use process builders, and, well, don't use process builders now. But, so they have to deliberately and make a conscious effort and get budget to fix technical debt, and it's every few years. And fortunately, they're a global company. They have a lot of money to play with, and therefore they can afford to do it because otherwise it's going to cost them probably even more, as I said, because it's affecting their business. For smaller companies, though, I think it's a reality that is difficult because you have to come up with the time and the money to fix this technical debt. So, it's a real tough reality out there for companies to deal with.
And it would be nice to spend this money on new exciting projects and AI, etc.
Yeah.
But obviously this kind of stuff has to be addressed. I mean, it's hard enough to get reps to use Salesforce as it is without account pages not loading.
Indeed.
So for people listening to this podcast, and maybe they can relate to some of this, maybe they can't, which would be a great thing. But how should people start thinking about dealing with technical debt exactly?
It's a good question and not an easy one to answer. And interesting, you said, I put out a survey on LinkedIn, and okay, I don't have the followers that you do, but I asked how many people had come across technical debt in their projects, and 100% of people said they had.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A couple of people said they didn't even know what technical debt was, which is fair enough, but 100% of the people that knew what technical debt was said they'd encountered it on either most or all projects or orgs they'd worked on. So it's a very big thing out there at the moment. So it's also inevitable. Let me say that now. You can't avoid it. You can minimize it, and that's what I would advise. The ways to minimize it are do your homework, educate yourself, understand best practices, read release notes for upcoming things so you can be prepared for stuff that may be changing. SF Ben does a fantastic job of summarizing those release notes.
Thank you.
Plug. But it's true. Read online blogs, listen to podcasts, go to events like World Tour, listen to what's being said about what's upcoming and what's changing and what you need to understand. But ask questions and kind of the community around Salesforce is like none other, genuinely. I think it's one of the most supportive communities out there, and people that put questions on the Trailblazer community pages or that go to the community group meetups. I go to a few of them, help out a few of them myself. Ask questions. Most people, not all, but most people are really willing to help and give advice. There's some good advice, there's some bad advice. But that's why, that's probably why I'm employed, is because one of my jobs is to go in and help out partner companies to make the right decisions and tell them what best practice is. The only reason I know is because I take the time to learn it myself. So read the release notes, understand the platform as best you can, use Trailhead. And just kind of familiarize yourself with what the pitfalls are and what should be avoided. And the only way to do that is being self-motivated to go and do it. Things that make that quicker and easier is stuff like, podcasts, webinars that get put on by Salesforce. There's loads of things out there, but it does sadly take time out of your day to go and do it. But if you do, the benefits that you and your company will get from that is massive.
Yeah, no, definitely. And something that you mentioned when we were speaking before is you're kind of encouraging quite a lot of your clients to move to standard functionality over custom, of which there is so much now, right? I mean, you think of like Lightning Experience, like the number of components that you've got to create a really rich app without using Visualforce like you had to before is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and again, there's a huge push in my company I'm working with currently. I've been working with them now for 3 years. And they used to be custom first. They used to say, right, we've got a really niche business requirement. Let's build it. And now they are, can we make our business processes match what comes as standard? And that change in mindset is massive. It leads to hugely reduced technical debt, because the more standard you get, the more every release that comes out from Salesforce, it's going to just work or improve or get better. And you get that for free because you've done something standard. If you've built a completely custom component that is very, very, very niche to just your needs, that's all it'll ever do. It's never going to change. It's never going to improve. You're not going to get the benefit of a multi-billion-dollar company who is pumping innovation into their products. So if you can use Salesforce Standard, then do. And if you can reimagine your business processes to fit that, all the better. I mean, it's often not possible. I'm a realist. But if you can, then it can really make a big difference.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I mean, something we talked about quite a lot in our first podcast episode, actually, and we continue to talk about it, is DevOps. And AI has kind of taken the spotlight at the moment over DevOps, but it was a huge topic. 2020, 2021. There's a lot of companies in the ecosystem who have gone all in, got funding, and created really great platforms. Salesforce have got the DevOps Center, of course. Our survey revealed that it was a developer survey, which is probably going to be using more DevOps tools, but they are 70% of developers in the survey using DevOps tools, which includes custom builds using Salesforce Developer Experience, Jenkins, third-party tools on the App Exchange, and DevOps Center as well. But we thought it was quite high. But for you, what is the role of DevOps in the ecosystem, and how does it help with technical debt?
So specifically with technical debt, it's not a magic bullet, but it can definitely help. I think of tools like Apex PMD, where it's going to look at the code you're writing and make suggestions on, you've actually made a really complex class here.
Is that open source?
It is. Yeah, you can just use it as a plugin to VS Code.
Nice.
But yeah, it will run against your code before you submit it to your org and say, yeah, you've made this method is really complex, consider making it more efficient, or it'll even say this is taking a long time to execute, and maybe reconsider how you're doing it, use lists better, use maps better, all that sort of stuff. So it gets really, it's not perfect, it won't rewrite your code for you, but and we'll talk about ChatGPT potentially later and the pitfalls there, but it can definitely help to produce more efficient and better code. Now, DevOps generally is great because it can take the overhead off some of your testing. It can speed up your business processes so you realize the value of your development quicker. And as you said, there are loads of tools out there. Salesforce has been built because of our partner ecosystem. We've got huge amounts of partners on the App Exchange producing fantastic tools. We also do our own, as you said. Because I'm a coder, because I'm a bit of a geek, I like the command line, the DX, writing my own pipelines, all that sort of stuff. And that's my preference. But actually, my current customer uses one of our partners as a DevOps tool. And I've said, yeah, great, fantastic. Let's jump on board. Let's do that. Let's make sure you're using it properly. And actually, you can use DevOps in a way that kind of bypasses some quality checks. Don't do that. Make sure you put the quality checks in place and use them. And one of my big things that I would definitely recommend to anyone out there looking to reduce technical debt is unit tests. If you're writing any kind of code, even flows, arguably, although that's a big point of contention, you should be testing that using a unit of code. Now, Salesforce enforces that. You have to have a certain level of code coverage to push any custom code to production. So why not do it properly and make sure your tests are good rather than just spam the class, make sure you hit enough lines and then say, yeah, assert true. You're not doing any tests there. All you're doing is ticking a box because you're forced to do it. So I'm a big proponent of test-driven development where you write the business requirement as tests first that fail because you're not currently meeting the business requirement. You write the minimum amount of code in the most efficient way possible to pass that test. Then you've written scalable, efficient code that's passing the business requirement. And you can have confidence in deploying that to production thinking, this is probably going to reduce my technical debt. Yeah. If you write the code first, you'll often hit a stumbling block and refactor something and then write a piece of code and then go back to it and forget to delete stuff that you've written in the past. And you finally get the final result you want and you don't ever go back and refactor and think, did I do a good enough job? Because you've got the result that passes the business requirement. Whereas if you flip it and do the tests first, I genuinely believe it can reduce your technical debt quite a lot. And you can feed that into your DevOps processes. It's not automated, but you can kind of embed that in how you do business and how you do development and operations.
Yeah, well, very cool. Kind of sounds like we could do a whole other podcast episode just on that.
Sure, happy to.
And just before we segue into the next section, we're talking a bit about the partner ecosystem. You don't have to name any names, but what are some general app categories or types of tools that you recommend to your customers?
So definitely any kind of test automation. There are lots out there. Several of them have sponsored SF Ben after parties in the past. Naming no names. There are also some fantastic DevOps companies out there. I've worked with several of them in the past. There are some big names. There are also quite a few little ones that people haven't necessarily heard of. Go on App Exchange, search for DevOps, search for automated testing, search for code quality checks and things like that. As I say, VS Code comes with a load of plugins. If you search for the Salesforce CLI pack, I think it comes with Apex PMD, although I'm not sure. You may need to just search for Apex PMD. It's been a while since I hacked any code together. But yeah, so test automation, DevOps itself, promotions or deployment automation, something like that. Quality and assurance tools, those sorts of things will get you some really good apps popping up. And read the reviews, see what real people are using and see how they find it. Yeah. And then, does it meet your budget? That's Fantastic. The other question.
That's great. Thanks so much, Matt. So moving on now, and I'd like to talk about something which is quite exciting. So quite a lot of people listening, watching to this will have heard of Parker Harris. So he is Salesforce's co-founder and CTO, although he's kind of moved over to Slack, which we'll talk about in a bit. But you interviewed Parker Harris at Salesforce. Tell us a bit about how that came about.
Yeah, so I'm part of a group of people who organises some knowledge sharing days. So any architect at Salesforce in the professional services team knows that we're just like anyone else. We need to learn. We need to get that knowledge. And if you're working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, it's difficult to get the time to kind of find out about the new stuff and learn all the new things and kind of also learn from your peers about issues they've had that maybe you'll face in your project. So we organise these days 2 or 3 times a year. We come together in the Tower here in London and we share knowledge. We talk about customer stories, about issues we've encountered and how to solve them, about best practice. We talk about innovation like data, cloud and AI. And we always end the day with an executive speaker, and it's where we interview someone within Salesforce who we think will have useful insight for us to hear about. Done a few of these now, and we've kind of talked to various people. And I just took a punt and messaged Parker on Slack and said, I don't suppose you fancy talking with a group of 400 odd people in London, do you, about the founding of the company, about your experiences and how it's changed over the years, about how you make decisions, and about Slack and your move to Slack and taking on the CTO role there. And to my surprise, he just went, sounds fantastic, talk to my PA and we'll get it organized. So yeah, it was a fantastic afternoon. He didn't join us in person, it was virtual, but it was great. We had him up on the Ohana floor in the tower on a massive screen. And he introduced us to his dog, and he was a really nice, down-to-earth guy, and it was a fantastic time.
Wow, very cool. I think that is. I've never actually met or spoken to Parker, but I've seen a lot of videos and a lot of like pictures of him with the community. But he does seem very, for someone who's a co-founder of a $1 billion company, very down to earth. He's obviously been involved in a lot of. He built the entire platform.
He built the platform pretty much, yeah. Not solo, and over time, obviously, we've had a few more developers on it, but it was pretty much him and Mark and obviously a couple of others. But he put in that he was the coder, he was the guy at the beginning. Interestingly, I don't think he came from a coding background. I think he did like an English degree or something.
Oh, really?
But don't quote me on that. But yeah, so he always had a passion for computing and coding, and when Mark and he got together and decided to start the whole thing with a few others, he was the guy who kind of hacked together the code. And he even, when he was talking to us earlier this year, said, every now and again, I still hack together some proof of concepts. And I'm, constantly thinking of new things that I can do and just hacking together some code. So he still keeps his hand in it, which is great.
Wow. Have you seen the video on YouTube of the day they started Salesforce?
Yes.
It's pretty cool to see. Like they've got like their family there, and they're opening like the door to the first office on Telegraph Hill. So it's a crazy startup story, because it is like probably one of the most successful modern day startup success stories. I wrote a post the other day comparing Salesforce to like Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, and they were all founded in the late 70s, early 80s. So it's kind of like a 20-year gap between them. So it's it's impressive how fast they've grown.
Absolutely.
And then give us a bit of, you were kind of asking some quite interesting questions, including, how decisions are made at the top of Salesforce. Give us some insight into kind of that.
Sure. Obviously, I can't say too much, and not that there's any secrets necessarily, but I don't want to kind of quote Parker necessarily, because my memory's not great. But it was just really nice to hear that it's still kind of that Telegraph Hill mentality sometimes of, right, what do we want to do? Is it a good idea? Is it something that we can see that's going to go? Let's do it. And there's no fear of kind of failure. They would almost rather kind of go for something early on, be the leading edge, and it not turn out. And I can think of a few examples, not that I'll say them, but then be that kind of company who goes, oh, okay, yeah, they're doing that. Maybe we should do it too. So I think it was really interesting to hear that they still to this day, and obviously they now have to consider shareholders, they now have to consider activist investors and all those other things, but they still are very much a kind of let's do it company. And I love that, because it means that we have great new innovation that comes out, and they're not scared to say, let's do it, let's put the effort in, let's really go 100%. Let's not be, I'm not sure if I should say, but let's not be half-assed about it. Let's do it full on.
Yeah.
Then it was really nice to hear that from someone who had founded a $1 billion company. Yep. So yeah,
it's a really interesting take, actually, because I think Salesforce does receive some criticism for going into new areas which are kind of like flash in the pan trends. But when you put it like that, they're as long as they're not dedicating insane amount of resources to this one thing, it's worth a go, I suppose. They've got this platform that they can build pretty sophisticated apps on pretty quickly, the whole low code thing. So it does make a lot of sense. And of course, I don't know, AI obviously, well, we hope isn't going to be a flash in the pan, but they went into AI very, very quickly. ChatGPT was released in November 2022, and I think Salesforce announced their initiatives in kind of March, April the following year. So very, very quickly. So, probably if they were a year later, it's not great, really, especially if AI is, all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, and I think people often forget that Einstein's been around even before ChatGPT. We've been AI investing for a while, but yeah, generative AI, ChatGPT just exploded, and everyone was like, "Wow, this is great! This is amazing," and we just went, "Yeah, let's do this," and it's great, and we are genuinely using it within Salesforce. I use it every day I work. Not to generate code or generate diagrams or anything like that. It's almost like my PA. It makes my job quicker and easier. It summarizes stuff for me. In Slack, there's a fantastic recap. You can tell it which channels that you're subscribed to that you want to sum up. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, every morning, it says, here's a summary of the channels that you care about and that you may not care enough to read the detail of every single line that's been posted there, but it can give me a summary and it saves me a huge amount of time. Every morning, I can just log on. First thing I do, read my recap, done. And you get a fancy Salesforce like confetti type thing at the end. Gamification. It makes you feel good, but it's genuinely saving time. And I'm still getting the information I need to hear that's being communicated to me, but I'm doing it in a way that I can digest quickly and easily, so I can get on with something else. Or it might summarize a meeting I've just had, and actually produce not just word for word recording, but the kind of sentiment, the feel of what was said, and it summarizes all that for me in a really human readable way.
It's super interesting because I can't relate to a lot of that stuff. We use Slack, but we're a company of 25, so you can just read the stuff. So it's something that I can't relate to, and we use it for quite a lot of. Well, I personally use it for quite a lot of creative stuff, like brainstorming. I use ChatGPT as a sounding board. What do you think about this? Generate me 10 variations of this idea or whatever. Yep. So I use it for very, very different things. I don't actually use Salesforce that much in my day-to-day job, but it's very interesting to hear those use cases because they sound very, very relevant. And something that I want to touch on just before we move on is Parker Harris was Salesforce CTO, but he has now moved over to Slack, right? Because I wasn't sure if he was both, but he is actually...
And that was something I wanted clarification on when I actually asked him directly. But he is now Slack CTO, no longer Salesforce CTO, still Salesforce co-founder and still very involved and still on the board and all that sort of stuff, but I believe. One of the questions we had for him was, why have you moved and what's this about? And I think he just finds it exciting. And he was like, I want to take Slack to where we always envisioned it to be when we bought it. And, not saying it's not done anything since the acquisition, because actually it's come way further than it could have done. But he was like, right, let's kick this into overdrive. Let's come out with some amazing new things, like the AI connections, like making it more embedded for productivity with Salesforce. So you can almost work now entirely in Slack, and it will do everything inside Salesforce for you. I submit all my timesheets every week in Slack, and it submits them straight into Salesforce. People can get account information out there really quickly and easily. It can generate a summary of all the opportunities on an account, all that sort of stuff, and it just does it all for you. And that's all come about recently, and he's pushing for more and more and more innovation. So I think he's just seeing it as almost not a startup, but very much a kind of exciting new adventure. And he was really animated talking about the exciting things coming out, lists and Canvas and the AI stuff that's embedded now in Slack. And I think he just wanted to kind of take it and see what could be done with it, really, and make it that vision of productivity that they always wanted it to be.
Yeah, and I get that, because obviously he's been at Salesforce for a good, 23-4 years before the time he joined Slack, so it must feel like, new, exciting, not a startup, but kind of like a startup mentality. And very cool. So moving on to kind of, a lot of what we talk about at Salesforce Ben is like careers and, and how people should think about their careers, what directions they can go, and, try and give some kind of advice backed up with kind of data and conversations that we're having with people. And obviously, AI is the next big thing. It's hard to get away from the word. But we possibly might be in a bit of a weird position where you were talking. We've clearly got a bit of a technical debt issue in the ecosystem. So kind of going back to basics is where people should kind of focus. There's best practices, writing code, fixing some of this legacy stuff, moving it over to new technologies. But at the same time, we need to learn about AI. Because this wave is coming. How do people need to think about those two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is down to your business. If your business is in a position to be very innovative and just thinking about the future, then that's great. Put your efforts into that and still use out of the box if you can. I remember talking ChatGPT. I remember the first time I used it, I think I said, oh no, sorry, it was Midjourney. And I said, I want a picture of a dog in a field or something. I couldn't think of anything. And it generated me a kind of weird three-legged thing that looked a bit like a dog in a field. And then I saw what other people were doing and saying, they were even specifying the camera type and the lens type and saying at 7 p.m. in the evening, golden hour. And it produced these amazing pictures. And I was like, okay, let's try this. And I sort of learned from them. If your company is in the position to jump onto AI stuff, great, do it. If it's in a position where it just needs to focus on getting back to basics, do that. There's probably a balance for most companies, and I suspect, and going back to the customer I'm currently working with, they have that cleanup project running. They also have a data cloud and AI proof of concept project running. They have enough money and enough time and enough staff to do both and do a decent job of both. Now, if you're going to just dip your toe in, it may not be worth the time or the money to do so, but if you can dedicate a little bit of time to both, then that's fantastic. You can also kind of fix as you go. So one of the things you can get out of technical debt is when you're making a change to a given area of the system, as you're putting the new thing in, think about fixing a few things as well. So kind of bolt on your technical debt cleanup to your innovation. And that allows you to do both at the same time in a relatively cost-effective way because your developers or your admins are already in there doing changes. Why not fix a couple of things while you're there? So that can be a real big benefit and strike that balance.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And I think something that we talked a lot about when ChatGPT got released was kind of clickbaity articles, but like, are Salesforce admin jobs going to disappear? Trying to kind of tease out these ideas and kind of, and genuinely look at the question, just see if they are. And, in all instances, it was no because of X, Y, Z. But I think it's safe to say that these kind of skills, such as going back to basic Salesforce architecture, administering, building flows, which are best practice, these kind of skills aren't going away, right? AI is coming, and people require those skills. But these kind of skills, AI is not going to replace kind of this stuff. Might improve productivity slightly, but it's still they're still very relevant.
And I think going back to my analogy of Midjourney, you need to know how to use the tool well.
Yep.
Using the tool, you can get a three-legged dog in a field,
yeah.
But using the tool well, you can get an amazing image you can use for marketing and no copyright because an AI's produced it. So those skills are definitely there, and now is the time to get those skills. Because if you are learning AI and to a certain extent data cloud, everyone is looking for who's an expert in this area because no one is yet, really. There's a few people who know a lot about it, but no one is like the absolute authority on how to do it because prompt builders only just come out. Einstein 1 is still in its infancy. And if you are leading that charge, then you will be considered among the forerunners. And suddenly your skill set is desirable to everyone out there because they want to learn it. Everyone wants to jump on that wave, as you said.
Yeah, very true. So a lot of people will be listening to this thinking you have one of the best jobs in the ecosystem. You're a technical architect, which is the pinnacle of a lot of people's careers, and you work at Salesforce. Hashtag dream job. It is a goal of many people's. It's quite often voted the best company to work for in many countries in the world. So, what kind of advice would you give to people who are, I suppose, at any stage of their career, maybe they're not an architect, but they want to kind of move into that and get into that architect mindset? How does an architect mindset differ from that of, say, an admin or a functional consultant?
So my view on it is, because I've been asked this question several times, because I help mentor a few people and they want to get into that architect space, and they say, how do I become that from where I am now? Often it's a combination of a couple of things. Zooming out. So a developer will look at the problem they are given. They will get that user story or that piece of information that they need to produce, and they will focus on that problem, and they will fix that problem. An admin, similar. They will be asked to do X, Y, or Z, and they will go and do X, Y, or Z. An architect will often just ask more questions. That's basically, we're just never happy to accept something as a given. And often it's a case of pushing back a little bit and saying, okay, you've told me this needs to happen, but have you thought about X, Y, or Z? And it's that zooming out from the one problem that they're looking at to the wider problem of how does this affect the business, and even why is the business asking for this in the first place? How does it affect the bottom line? How does it affect the end user? Have you even considered the end user in this? And kind of how is it going to have knock-on effects to other systems that your system talks to, and all those things that you need to think about a little bit more as an architect. You actually need to think more about business stuff than about technical stuff a lot of the time. Technical architects, yes, you do need to consider integration, whether it's asynchronous, data packets flying around, whether it's encrypted, and all those technical stuff, yes. But the big thing is, how am I going to impact something with this change? And kind of zooming out to kind of the macro level rather than the micro of one user story. You're looking at the epic scale, they're looking at the user story scale. So a lot of it is just ask questions. If you're a developer today and you get a user story, don't be arsey and push back and say, why am I doing this? But maybe ask a few questions about how did we get to this point? That is thinking like an architect. How did we get to the point where this is now the requirement? What decisions and processes went into producing this requirement here? And actually, sometimes if you do that, you'll ask the right questions, you'll end up not having to do the story because they realize it's not needed, or the story will change and evolve because you've architected a different solution by asking questions. Never undersell yourself and say, I am not in a position where I should be asking questions. Anyone can ask questions. Anyone can message their CTO on Slack and say, do you fancy a chat? Don't put yourself out of that position and say you're not qualified. Anyone is qualified to ask a question, and that is the biggest thing for an architect, is asking questions and absorbing knowledge.
Yeah, fantastic. And would you say working in a consultancy seriously helped you in that respect? Because, there are many advantages for working for an end user versus consultancy could be seen as more stressful. You've got more clients, you've got billable hours to hit, but the learning is kind of unrivaled, right? Yeah,
I think that's fair. And I do think that is a huge benefit, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And actually, and I'll be very honest here, I don't think architect's for everyone. Whilst it is, seen as the pinnacle and if you're a really good developer and you love coding, be the best developer you can be. If you're really, really, really good at working at marketing, stick with marketing. The careers path tool on Trailhead shows you there's lots of end goals. Yes, there is an architect path, but there's lots of end goals that you could do incredibly well at. I guess the salary and the title is a big draw for a lot of people, and I get that. Don't get me wrong. I've done it myself. I'd be a hypocrite if I said don't become an architect. But also maybe realize that architect isn't for everyone. Some people love it, some people hate it, and they just want to be hands-on coding, or they want to be the go-to person to build them a new flow or something like that. And architects don't do that. You tend to end up talking in meetings all day and drawing diagrams in some sort of diagram tool. And, it's important and it can save a whole load of money for the company, and it's still a very vital role, but it's not for everyone. But yeah.
No, it's a great point. I think it's very easy and natural to fall into the trap of chasing titles, chasing money. But I think what you actually need to do is evaluate what you enjoy about your specific role and double down on that. And I think the great thing about the ecosystem, especially now, when I started, it was kind of like admin, consultant, architect, developer, like 4 roles. But, now you've got product owners and project managers, program architects, just so many different roles. So no, that's some great advice, Matt. Really, really appreciate it. Before we sign off today, any last kind of advice for aspiring architects out there, or what kind of, maybe if someone wants to get a job at Salesforce, what kind of tips could you give them to land that role? Okay, so I asked Parker. My closing remark to Parker was, if you had one advice to a Salesforce professional today, what would it be? And he said, and this wasn't just a kind of cheesy line marketing, because he was talking to people who already worked for Salesforce. He said, get on board data, cloud, and AI.
And if he's saying it, it's probably worth listening to, because that means a lot of focus within the company is going that way. And, you know, I've done so. I love Data Cloud. I'm using it with my customer at the moment. AI, I think, is a huge potential. So that's definitely one thing. But the biggest piece of advice, if you want to be an architect, I suspect, would be keep asking questions. Keep learning. No one knows everything about Salesforce. Not one person, not even Parker. So, you know, there will always be something to learn, but realize as well that you don't need to learn everything, because if you do, your brain will explode. There's just too much. So, yeah. And I think I said it earlier as well. Don't undersell yourself and think, I'm not yet an architect. I'm not good enough. Do the job and then you'll be good enough. I mean, you'll end up doing it before you realize it. You're an architect.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much,
No
Matt.
problem.
Cheers.
Thanks.